Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Just before the break I was here with my sister Abda Khan, who's a lawyer and an author. Thank you again for coming and spending time with us, Abda.
You're welcome, thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we were just talking about writing and how it can express, help us deal with emotions and express things, and you just told us that actually you got into writing because you recognise there are all these untold stories and how are people hearing and learning about them, and you want to give some of that a voice.
Yeah.
So your first book was Stained.
Yes.
When did you write that?
So Stained was published in 2016 in America. Actually, it was published in the States, although it is available worldwide on Amazon. And it took me about a year to write that book, and then sort of a year after that it was published. So it's a bit of a process. Yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
So a year of, what was the subject matters that you dealt with in
Well,
this?
I dealt with a lot of the issues that I'd come across through my work and through the communities and now through the charity work that I do. Stained is basically, it's set in Bradford actually, Stained is. And it's a story of Selena, who's an 18-year-old British Pakistani girl, lost her father recently, about a year back. And just going through a difficult, that difficult period of time, A-levels coming up, finding it hard. I think that's actually, when people read that, they think, oh, that's kind of similar to you. Yeah, it is kind of, like, I was drawing on my own experiences in terms of losing my mother. Yeah,
they say first books are autobiographical.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, a little bit of it. It's not all of it. Not all of it. So anyway, so this is an issue I've come across quite a lot with women. And so in the book, she's actually raped by a trusted member, a trusted family friend. And he uses the concept of family honour to ensure that she doesn't tell anybody about what's happened. And then that concept of family honour then, so-called honour, leads her to take certain decisions in her life, especially looking at her mother, because her mother's a widow, and obviously our communities sometimes can be a little bit, it's a bit difficult for widows sometimes, especially if it comes to the question of the tarnishing of the family honour. I don't want to give too much away because it is a really dramatic and compelling story, and you'd have to read it to see what I mean. But basically, so it deals in the first person. It's all about Selena. It's all about her journey, about how she goes from that attack to getting some sort of peace in her life, and all the things that she endures in between. Basically, the decisions that she has to make in order to what she sees as preserving the family honour. So that was that, that concept of honour, and as a result of that book, actually, I do a lot of talks, and I'm always asked to, participate at events relating to honour. And I was not here with the recent event. I was abroad actually, but there was an honour-based violence and forced marriage roadshow. I took part in that, in the initial launch of that, and various of that. I'm doing another event this week, again to do with honour-based violence. So I think that book, in the sense that it touched upon issues which aren't normally touched upon in contemporary British fiction. So it was a bit groundbreaking in that sense. But for me, the biggest surprise, but also the best thing for me, was that all the women that contacted me after they'd seen or heard about the book or read the book, women contacted me with their stories. Told me how they were going to get counselling because they hadn't got counselling before, and even women telling me that they were going to go to the police to report rapes that they hadn't previously reported. So for me, that book, that novel, had a great impact because it had an impact on those women's lives.
That's huge,
one woman
isn't it?
in particular wrote to me, and she said, and it's strange because it was like a mirror image of the story. She had been raped 4 years previously, and the man had used his position in the community and said to her that if you report this to the police, I'll make sure that you and your family basically are pulled through the mud, and I will dishonour you and your family completely, and I'll turn it around, make sure make out you were you were the baddie in it all, basically. So I think for her, like, reading that book, she said, having read the story and Selena's journey and the journey that she took, I now feel brave enough to go to the police 4 years after this and report it. And she did. She asked me how to best go about it. This was through emails because she contacted me through my website, and I discussed with her how to go about it safely, where she can get support, where she can get help. So I think in that sense, the book for me is like really important.
Fantastic. I mean, that is amazing, isn't it? So even if you'd spent a year and only touched one person's life, it's in such a significant and deep
And actually,
way.
because of that book, it was recognised with 2 different awards as well. I was given a True Honour Award by IQRA, which is the Iranian Kurdish women's rights organisation down in London, who do a lot of honour-based violence work, and they honour women every year who've kind of worked in that, done something in that field. And obviously the book got their attention, and they did actually recognise that. And I was actually also a finalist and highly commended in the NatWest Asian Women of Achievement Awards, again as a result of that book. So that book, whilst the publishers it's difficult to get books like that published because it doesn't fit the mould of you know, what's seen as, you know, sort of bankable, saleable fiction, you know, which I disagree. I think as long as the writing is good, and if the book is backed, it will do well. But you know, at the end of the day, it's a difficult industry to crack, because they're looking at what's you know,
commercial.
What's commercial,
what will sell, what will make them money, basically.
What's commercially viable, and it's you know, it's very you know, categorized as well. You know, if you don't fit neatly into a category with a particular book, then it's even harder to get it published. But obviously there are people out there that do want to read about issues like that, and you know, the story sounds very dark, but it's not. There's lots of light and shade in it. There's a lot of quirky things about our community, our culture, lots of funny bits in it as well. So I don't want to make out that it's such a you know, beginning to end awful traumatic story. It's not.
No,
you know.
I was just going to say, whichever way you go about it, there will be something interesting in there. And actually just seeing this journey, because I think what you've probably done with your book, and I'm sure lots of people are talking about it, is opening up this concept of honour. Because there's a couple of things that bug me about it. One, there is no honour in violence.
No.
So I don't even know why we call it that, you know, none whatsoever. And then also, why is honour in some families all wrapped up in what the women do? Do the men not bring the families into dishonour? Because I frankly think they do.
Well, you know, absolutely. It's all about the women, and it's the, you know, this concept of so-called honour is that women have to conform to certain norms that are dictated to them by that society or that community or that family, and if they stray from those so-called norms, then you know, women have been killed in this country for as little as having a love song played on a community radio station, or for wearing makeup. You know, that's a fact. You know, women in this country are killed. You know, it would shock you that, you know, about 12 to 16 women a year are killed in this country for so-called honour. So I mean, that's a lot of women that are killed. I mean, 2 women a week in this country are killed anyway by their partner or ex-partner, you know, in terms of DV, domestic violence. But if you're talking about specifically about honour-based violence,
and that figure, I mean, I mean, I need to check again if it's gone up, but 2 women a week are murdered by their intimate partner usually. But then actually, if you look at all deaths, so the women who commit suicide, that's 10 or 12 women a week then who die as a result of domestic violence, but not necessarily murder. They take their own lives because they know the way out of it.
And if you look at this concept of honour and what it's doing to our young women, you know, like in this country, girls from the South Asian background are 30% more likely to commit suicide than the national average. That's a lot of girls, you know, committing suicide. Now I'm wondering, what does that concept of, you know, the confines of so-called honour have to do with this high rate? Because obviously it's very prevalent in our South Asian and Muslim communities, and it so happens that there's a 30% higher rate of suicide amongst those young women. So you have to ask yourself, you know, what are we doing? What's
the relationship between the two? And then also, I understand there's a higher level of self-harm amongst this group of women as well. So there's something going on there, and as a society and as a community, we need to look at that, don't we? And as families, that what are we doing that creates an environment in which our young women are feeling that they have to either physically harm themselves or they have to actually take their lives. What, you know, because in a way that means we're creating a miserable condition for them. And whether that's because our expectations are too high, so we want them to do too well and they're not able, or because our expectations are too limiting, so we're not giving them wings and letting them fly and supporting them to be everything they can be to, you know.
So, and also you've got to look at, I think this concept of forced marriages is still very much in existence, and obviously there's nothing Islamic about forced marriage, absolutely nothing. So, you know, people get culture and religion completely mixed up, and use the mask of religion, the mask of, you know, of Islam to justify cultural abnorms, I would say. They're not norms, but, you know, whatever the cultural traditions of, you know, that were perhaps, you know, employed back in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, wherever, you know, and this, you know, they're still trying to cling on to those traditions here, but, you know, you have to remember they have nothing to do with Islam. You know, Islam gives a woman an absolute right to choose her husband. You know, if she chooses not to marry who her parents wanted to marry, then that's her choice. But obviously that's not something that's you know, who's at fault though? I mean, you know, who needs to do more? We need to, I say we do need to educate the community more. I know there's a lot of work being done with professionals to spot honour-based violence, you know, in schools and things, and that's really important. But we also need to get within the communities, and still we need to educate the communities to differentiate between religion and culture.
And even with the forced marriage thing, most forced marriages, this is my hypothesis, it might not be true, but I'll just test it with you. Most forced marriages start off with a mum and dad with the best of intentions saying, here's someone that we think will be good for you to marry. At some point, daughter says, actually, no, I don't think that's a good fit, that's not for me or whatever. And then mum and dad quite often spend quite a bit of time, mum and dad and other people, spend a bit of time trying to convince her.
Sometimes grandparents, aunts,
uncles, aunties, sisters, siblings get caught up in this as well. So then they spend a bit of time trying to convince her he's the right one. She doesn't change her mind. And then that's where it becomes coercion, it becomes slowly, and that's the sort of continuum, because and that's my hypothesis, but obviously I don't know all of the relationships. But the question is, that there is that point, is if you've presented it and you've raised your daughter with a good set of values and principles and ability to think for herself and, you know, what will work, ultimately you want her to be in a successful marriage.
Of course.
You want her to be happy, and you want her to make her partner happy, and together that they're a good family unit that supports the rest of the family unit, etc. So forcing someone into that, doing, you know, like it's just nonsensical, because the whole purpose of marriage is that you won't go and do other things.
Exactly.
And if you're in a marriage with someone who you cannot stand, then that's not actually
it's not going to work. It's never going to work.
That's not meeting the full. That's not Islamic, I would say. I'm not a scholar of, clearly, but the point of marriage is that it is about love between two people, and it is about support between two people, and there's no shame in saying that.
And there's no compulsion in marriage. Just like there's no compulsion in religion, there can't be compulsion in marriage. You can't compel somebody, you can't force somebody to marry somebody against their will. That's not a valid marriage as far as I can see.
Absolutely, and it's pointless, because it's not doing what the marriage was intended for. So not for the, you know, God's plan, not for God's plan, basically, in terms of marriage. Unfortunately, we as humans find some awful things to do to each other in the name of religion and the name of culture, and I do think, you know, we need to stop calling all this honour-based. That's my personal thing as well. It's not honour, but it's also not just specific to the South Asian community.
No, it's not. No. Honor, so-called honour-based violence exists across the board,
and
we
need to nip it out at the bud as soon as possible. And that starts by families being honest.
And always having a dialogue with your children. You know, speaking to them. You know, you know, focusing on these issues.
And we're going to come back and we're going to talk about a little bit more about this and your next book after this short break.